Hi there, Great 108. Good to see you tonight. I never quite know when the live is starting because mine just spins for a while, but I noticed on one of the last videos that it's recording, even though it doesn't look like it. So, hey, it's a Saturday night. I hope everybody's had a great weekend so far. I am really enjoying my success series, of course, because I'm talking about myself, but that isn't the point. The point is that when I was encouraged to do a 10-minute a day, write down what you're proud of in your life, it's a confidence journal entry. I realized that the telling these success stories are a great way to get in state, right? You have to be really bonded to your stories so that, it energizes you. When you start talking about what is in your past, it makes you happy. It makes you um, gain that self confidence that you've been, it reminds you of that self confidence, right? So, as I was telling you guys the other day, I ended up teaching in a high school in California. And then we moved to Oklahoma. And when we got to Oklahoma, I realized that even though I was enjoying teaching, it didn't make a lot of sense for me. I was a mom of three, and they were all pretty young. So daycare would have been outrageous. And in Oklahoma, teacher salary is pretty low. So I did the math because I was a math teacher, right? And I realized that I could make about the same as I could working at McDonald's, and I wouldn't have to grade papers. So I decided not to become a teacher in Oklahoma um, because putting the kids in daycare would have just been crazy. And so that's when I started my .com. Now, the .com didn't give me a lot of love. It was a business that I started with my dad. It was my dad's business. He wanted to do something online. And we did a really good job. In about 2 years with a baby um, and my other two, and I was a Girl Scout leader and all those things that stay-at-home moms do, we did about a half a million in sales, and that was generic. No one knew how to use the internet back then. It was just starting out, and we really didn't know what was happening. So I was pleased to say that I did that, but I didn't. It was my heart wasn't into it, and so we moved to Alabama. My kids were young. Schools in Alabama were not very good. And I was very concerned about that, but we were only staying there for 9 months. And so I thought, well, not a big deal. I will just go ahead and put the kids in public schools. We'll do our best. Well, after we'd been there for that first year, we found out that we were going to be stationed there for another 2 years. Well, that changed everything. Number one, we had to stop renting and we needed to move to a different area of town. So we did that, and I put the kids, well, I wanted to put the kids in a private school based on what we had seen in the public schools, but I couldn't afford the tuition. So I went to a school that was highly recommended by a friend of mine, met with the director there, and in the end, he needed a technology teacher. And so I became the technology director of the private school in exchange for the tuition for my three kids. And so they were all taken care of during the day, and I worked as this technology director. And while I was there, so I was re-engaged back into teaching, and I loved it. I love to teach. There's just no doubt about it. And about that time, there was this new technology that came out, and I started doing um, using this tool and getting pretty excited about things. And I ended up opening a tutoring center using this technology, and I was in love. This business was the best thing I had done, and it was really cool. It was a very God-led experience for me, as in I didn't know why I was being led to do this until one day. Actually, I rented this neat little storefront downtown. We had the cutest little downtown in this little Alabama location, and I couldn't afford it. I knew that I wasn't really making the kind of money that I wanted with the .com, and I knew it. We'd been doing it from home, so the extra expense of having an office just wasn't quite there. And so I saw this place and was really excited about it and called the owner and asked to go look at the storefront. And I fell in love with it, but I knew I couldn't afford it, not with the income that I had. And so I called her up and I told her, I said, I'm sorry, I can't rent it, even though I just love it. It would be perfect as an office for me. And then I hung up the phone and I went to bed, and all night long I just tossed and turned. And I woke up in the morning and I said, I have to rent this location. I can't not do this. I don't even know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to make this work. And so I signed the lease, and I thought, what am I good at? What could I do? And I thought, well, I wish I had a dime for everybody who told me that they didn't like math. And I thought, well, I could do a math tutoring. I could do math tutoring to pay my rent, and then I would be able to do my other business on the side, and I would have this downtown office. And so, first time ever in my entrepreneurial career, the first day that I leased this office, I had my kids and we all went and I showed them, and I said, let's order a pizza and we'll sit on the floor and we'll eat the pizza. We had no furniture, no nothing. And so my kids had their backpacks with them, and my daughter took a piece of paper out and she wrote on this piece of 8.5 by 10 piece of paper, and she wrote math tutoring in colored pen, and we taped it on the window. And so we're sitting there waiting for the pizza, not even 5 minutes later. And I heard the doorbell, and I looked up, and there was this mom and dad standing there, and there was a grocery store across the street. And they said, we saw your sign, and you are the answer to prayer. And that was the first time that that happened to me. And it felt so good. And I loved that. That job was the best. I had this little math tutoring center. I worked one-on-one with kids. I used this technology as a way to get them excited about math. I did all kinds of community events with the technology, and it was a blast. And it was the first time that everything just kind of came together in my experience. However, I told you I was a military spouse, and shortly after, it probably was about my first year in that tutoring center, we got orders to move. And we were moving back to Oklahoma, where we had lived for 3 years, and I knew the area really well. And it was a very highly educated, good school system in Oklahoma that was already had tutoring centers, and it was not going to support what I did. That was crushing. I didn't want to leave. And I took a look at my resume. I needed to get a job when we got to Oklahoma. And I realized that everything I had done was all disjointed. And I mean, I was a business grad. I knew that my resume needed to have a path, and I had nothing. It just, nothing connected. And I was pretty frustrated at that point. And I looked up and I said, God, you need to pick my next job. I give up. Just whatever you want, you do it. And I said, but please let me be the answer to prayer. And I tell you what, that opened up a whole new world for me that I was not expecting. We moved to Oklahoma. Before I knew it, I was asked to be the founder of the very first recovery high school for teenagers in recovery from drug and alcohol addiction. And it had never been done in our state. There was only maybe about 6 at the time schools at the high school level modeled throughout the United States. They had some at the college, but not at the high school. And I knew nothing about recovery. But I wasn't afraid of online education and using technology to help kids. And it was kind of that entrepreneurial business skill that you needed. And I was already good at working one-on-one because we were going to just have a small number of kids that would come into a center. And instead of going to regular high school, they would come here and learn online. And that would keep them out of the schools for drug and alcohol use. So I learned a ton. I was in that job for 5 years, and it was amazing. And I learned quickly that when God gives you a position, it's exactly what you need. He connected all those dots for me that I never thought were possible. Then the next part of this was, after 5 years, I ended that relationship. with that school. Even though I loved it so much, it was just like it was time to move on. And I remember having a conversation with a friend, and I was sad. I said, we only at the most had about 17 students at a time because it was hard work working with these kids. And I remember calling a friend and saying, "Oh, I made a mistake. I miss what I was doing so much." And she said, "No, go make an impact for a lot more people." So before I knew it, I was leading the first online virtual charter school program for in our state for a startup group, and we started with 1,200 students. And I was training the 100 teachers that we hired at the last minute when we realized how big we were going to be. And that was an incredible time period. I spent about a year and a half working with that group and just learned so much, got so much exposure to online education and um, just what it's like for students. I mean, I already knew that online education was going to be the wave of the future. I could just tell that that's where everything was headed. And so we did that for about a year and a half. And I say we because I had some very good friends, and we were in love with the model. We weren't in love with how the two entrepreneurs that had started the school were doing things because we had that education background and they were running it like a business. And so we left and we decided to start our own. And it was very hard. But we set our mind to it. We decided that that's what we were going to do. And we had to fight a lot of politicalness, state systems, and we wanted to be a nonprofit. We ended up being fairly small. We started with about 50, and I think at our peak we had about 70. But we didn't have a lot on our side. Our budget was cut almost. We started with about a fifth of what we thought we could, and we were statewide, so we had to manage all students throughout the state. So I had a very busy time period with that school. Learned a lot more. So you know how they say that entrepreneurs need to fail, right? I failed. I failed several times. That one was a big deal to me. Um, but it wasn't very long into the school year, almost before the end of the first year, that our state board voted to shut us down. There was a lot of reasons. It wasn't anything derogatory other than they just felt that the bigger school needed more space. It was kind of how it all ended up. It was a political experience and not a very fun time in my life. And I actually shrunk quite a bit afterwards, trying to figure out what I was going to do next because I kind of felt like education not my thing anymore. Um, I know that's not true now, but I needed some distance from it. Now, why am I spending all this time telling you about this? The really important thing is that in the success, you also have failures, right? I love my Tony Robbins life coach mentioned to me the other day that Tony Robbins has failed more times than most people because he's started so many businesses and had so many ventures. And look at how successful he is, right? So I have spent a lifetime being afraid of those failures. But the reality is, those failures are what makes you successful, that trial and error and not giving up. And so as I've created my masterminds and I've done my things, I definitely am leaning towards that area of course creation because I understand online education. Once I get all these pieces where I figure all the other stuff out, I'm getting very, very close. Like the World Summit really helped, and again, the mastermind pieces, they're all there for me. So I'm just bringing it all in at this point. And to me, that's a success story. So thank you for listening. I know this was a little bit longer, but I hope you are using this time to explore your successes and what works really well for you. And I look forward to talking to you tomorrow about the next step of where this went. Have a great day.